If you've ever walked away from someone and they didn't chase you, if you've ever gone silent and expected it to shake them, but they stayed calm, distant, unbothered, there's a reason you're watching this right now, and it's not about them. It's about you. It's about something deep in your gut that keeps asking, why do I give so much to someone who gives me so little? Why do I feel like I'm constantly auditioning just to be seen, loved, chosen by someone who can barely show up? Here's the truth no one wants to admit. Avoidants don't fear losing you. They fear facing themselves without your emotional labor keeping them comfortable. But what they never see coming is the super empath, not the wounded version of you, the evolved version. The one who stops overgiving, the one who matches energy, walks away without noise, and reclaims everything they gave away trying to earn love from someone emotionally unavailable. And when that shift happens, the avoidant doesn't just miss you, they crumble because you weren't the weak one. They just mistook your depth for dependency. In this video, I'm going to break down exactly how a healed empath silently dismantles the avoidant's ego, not out of revenge, but by finally choosing themselves. And if you've ever been the one left wondering what went wrong by the end of this video, you'll know it was never about being too much. It was about giving your power to someone who wasn't ready to receive it. Let's talk about silence, real silence. Not the passive, aggressive kind, not the manipulative silence that some use to control or punish. I'm talking about the silence that comes from clarity, from self-respect, from having finally seen enough. When a super empath goes quiet, it's not because they've given up. It's because they've woken up. See, avoidants feed on emotional dissonance. They thrive in the fog. When you're emotionally activated, confused, insecure, trying to get back to the closeness you once felt, they have the upper hand. They pull away and you lean in. They ignore and you overfunction. This keeps the dynamic exactly where they feel safe, distant but desired, in control without being vulnerable. But something changes when the empath finally reaches their threshold. That breaking point isn't loud, it's still, because by the time they stop explaining themselves, they're not trying to be heard anymore, they're choosing to hear themselves. This is where the power shift begins. The avoidant expects protest. They expect an emotional reaction because that validates their importance. But when the empath responds with non-reaction, it dismantles the avoidant's illusion of control. They don't hear screaming, pleading, chasing. They hear nothing, and in that nothing they come face with something terrifying, their own emptiness. Silence from a super empath isn't just absence, it's a boundary. It's the psychological equivalent of saying, I no longer need you to see me, I see myself. It's in that moment that the empath moves from survival to sovereignty. They stop needing closure because they've outgrown the situation that required it. They no longer feel the need to explain why they were worthy of love, because they know they are. From a psychological standpoint, this is self-regulation at its highest level. It's emotional mastery, and philosophically, it's freedom, because true liberation isn't walking away angry, it's walking away clear. And while the avoidant may not show it immediately, the silence echoes, it lingers, because nothing disorients someone who's used to emotional pursuit like being met with grounded stillness. That kind of silence doesn't just destroy the ego, it reveals it. It exposes the fragile foundation of avoidance, fear, insecurity, control masked as independence. When that mirror goes up and the empath steps back, the avoidant sees what they've been running from the entire time. And that's the real twist. Super empaths never wanted to destroy anyone, but when they stop betraying themselves, it naturally collapses any dynamic that depended on their self-abandonment. So the next time you feel like you're being too quiet, too distant, too disconnected from someone who used to make you chase, remember this. Silence isn't the absence of power. It's the arrival of it. And sometimes the loudest thing you can ever say is nothing at all, keep watching. Because this isn't just about them. It's about who you become when you finally stop chasing and start remembering who you are. One of the most disorienting things for an avoidant is when the super empath stops chasing and starts matching energy, because up until that point, the dynamic has always been predictable. The avoidant pulls back, withdraws, creates distance, and the empath leans in, closes the gap, overcompensates, and tries to repair the emotional rupture. Not because they're weak, but because they're wired for connection. They sense tension and instinctively want to heal it. But there comes a moment, often subtle, always profound, when the empath realizes this is not healing. This is imbalance disguised as intimacy. This is one person holding the door open while the other walks away. And when that clarity hits, something radical happens. The empath stops, not out of resentment, but out of realization. They stop initiating. They stop over-explaining. They stop trying to make it easy for someone who's made it difficult for them over and over again. Instead, they begin to mirror. You respond slowly, so do they. You ignore a message. They don't double text. You act unavailable. They redirect their energy entirely. Now, this isn't revenge, it's reflection. And it's powerful. Because what the avoidant has relied on all along is your consistency in inconsistency. They've come to expect your emotional labor to sustain the connection. But when the empath mirrors the avoidant's own distance, a deep truth is exposed. One-sided effort only works when someone agrees to keep giving. Mirroring, in this context, isn't playing games. It's breaking the pattern. It's saying, if you're not willing to show up with presence, then I will stop showing up with persistence. Psychologically, this is a form of recalibration. It's the empath regulating their own nervous system after months or years of dysregulation caused by the hot and cold dynamic of the avoidant. It's no longer about waiting for someone to step up. It's about stepping back to regain equilibrium. Philosophically, it's a reclaiming of power, because true power isn't control, it's choice. And when the empath chooses to stop overgiving, they reclaim a part of themselves that was quietly being traded for crumbs. This shift hits the avoidant harder than we think. Why? Because underneath that avoidant exterior is often a deep insecurity, the fear of not being enough, the fear of being truly seen. And when the one person who always tried to reach them suddenly stops reaching, they're left with the thing they've been avoiding all along themselves. And here's the beautiful irony. When the empath stops chasing, they stop feeling exhausted. They stop living in emotional deficit. And they start realizing that love should never feel like a performance auditioning for attention. So if you're at that place on the edge of burnout, heart open but worn thin, let this be your turning point. You don't need to become cold. You just need to stop being the only one keeping the connection alive. Because sometimes the most loving thing you can do is stop fighting for someone who won't even meet you halfway. One of the most underestimated moments in a super empath's transformation is when they finally outgrow the narrative, and I want you to really hear that. They don't just move on. Emotionally, they transcend the very story that kept them stuck. That old loop, that exhausting cycle of trying to love someone who kept them at arm's length, who gave just enough to keep them hopeful, but not enough to make them feel safe. You see, the avoidant lives in a carefully constructed narrative, one where they're not the problem, they're just independent, not ready, damaged from their past. And while those stories often come from real pain, they become a shield, a way to justify emotional unavailability without ever taking responsibility for the impact it has on others. And here's where it gets dangerous for the empath, because they are so emotionally intuitive, so naturally compassionate, they buy in. They start adjusting themselves to fit inside that narrative. They stop asking for what they need. They tell themselves, if I just love them enough, they'll feel safe, they'll open up, they'll see me. But over time, something changes. The empath begins to see the pattern, not just with this person, but with past relationships too. They realize this isn't about healing someone else, it's about not abandoning themselves in the process. And when that realization clicks, the narrative no longer holds power. The spell breaks, and this is where the avoidant starts to feel something they're not used to: accountability. Because the moment the empath detaches from the old story, they no longer respond to guilt or gaslighting or breadcrumbing. They're not angry, they're awake. And that calm detachment is devastating to the avoidant's ego. Because for the first time, the story doesn't work. The control they once had, subtle, emotional, unspoken, no longer lands. The empath stops participating in the identity the avoidant projected onto them. They're no longer too much, too sensitive, or too emotional. They're just done shrinking themselves to fit into a dynamic that was never meant to grow. This is where the avoidant often spirals, not outwardly, but internally. Because if you've built your identity around keeping people at a distance, what happens when someone actually walks away? Not with drama, but with dignity. The truth is, once the empath outgrows the narrative, they also outgrow the need to prove themselves within it. They don't need to be right, they just need to be free. And freedom isn't always loud, it's often a quiet decision that changes everything. So if you've been stuck in that old story of being the fixer, the chaser, the one who always bends, this is your moment to rewrite the script. Because when you stop letting someone else's wounds dictate your worth, you don't just leave the relationship, you leave the role you were never meant to play.